Imagine owning a piece of paradise. Not just a backyard, but a pristine, 2-acre, spring-fed lake. A sanctuary. Now imagine a woman, we'll call her Karen, who believes her HOA rules, which govern meticulously manicured lawns and approved mailbox colors, somehow extend to your private, deeded body of water. Impossible, right? Wrong. And what happens when a petty power trip runs headfirst into a decision I made late last night, a decision involving teeth, fins, and a whole lot of danger? Stay with me, because the story goes from zero to absolutely terrifying in a heartbeat, and the look on Karen's face when the realization hit, that's the shot you'll want to see. My name is Ethan. I bought this property specifically because of the lake. It's completely private, nestled far enough back that only my deed outlines its boundaries. But Karen, the self-appointed queen of Cedar Creek Estates, decided my lake, my beautiful, naturally occurring lake, was a public nuisance. Her first skirmish? My fishing dock. It's not aesthetically compliant, Ethan. The wood is too rustic. She shrieked. I politely showed her the county land survey, proving her jurisdiction ended 50 feet from the water's edge. She retreated, but her eyes promised war. This wasn't about aesthetics, it was about control. Karen couldn't stand something she couldn't govern. The heat this week was brutal, topping 100 degrees. The lake, being spring-fed, was the only cool spot for miles. I noticed Karen and her 2 kids, Caleb and little Daisy, sneaking onto my property through a gap in the fence a few times. They'd swim right where the cattails grew thickest, hidden from view. I tolerated it, initially. Kids should swim. But the tolerance ended yesterday afternoon when I saw Caleb tossing empty Gatorade bottles into the water, and Daisy yanking up my freshly planted lilies. I marched down, politely but firmly told them to leave, and reiterated that this was private property. Karen, who was sunbathing on my dock, stood up, put her hands on her hips, and delivered the line that sealed her fate. Ethan, this is an amenity that should be shared. My kids have a right to cool off. And frankly, I'm calling the HOA about the neglect of this water feature. That night, something snapped. This lake was my passion project. I didn't just fish here, I managed the entire ecosystem. And in a moment of pure, justifiable spite, fueled by her arrogance, I called a specialized aquatic farm 4 states away. I made a very large, very expensive purchase. The delivery arrived under the cover of darkness. My plan was risky, dramatic, and possibly insane, but it was the only way to send a message Karen and the entire HOA would never forget. I stocked my lake. Not with bass. Not with catfish. I stocked it with something that would instantly make trespassing a matter of life and death. The sun rose on a quiet morning, but the water in my lake held a new, ancient, and terrifying secret. The sun climbed higher, baking the asphalt of Cedar Creek Estates, and I settled onto my porch with a thermos of coffee, ostensibly reading, but in reality, waiting. The air was heavy, humid, and charged with anticipation. I knew Karen wouldn't be deterred by my warning yesterday. To her, being told no was simply a challenge to her perceived authority. She views any quiet moment on her neighbor's property as an opportunity for conquest. Sure enough, around 10:30 a.m., I saw the telltale glint of her golf cart bouncing down the access road behind my house. She parked it strategically, half hidden by my large oak tree, the universal signal for I'm not doing anything wrong, I swear. Her 2 kids, Caleb and Daisy, wearing bright blue and pink swimsuits, were already scrambling through the fence gap. This time, Karen didn't stay on the dock. She had a cooler, a paperback novel, and a large, inflated swan raft. She was establishing squatting rights. I watched, stone-faced, as Caleb cannonballed into the deepest part of the lake, followed by Daisy, who cautiously waded in near the edge. The water, clear and cool, looked deceptively inviting. Karen inflated her swan raft and then settled into it near the middle, sipping something pink from a Yeti tumbler. I checked my watch. The delivery guys had assured me the new residents, having been transported and acclimated quickly overnight, would be feeling particularly active this morning, especially with the sudden disturbance. My blood pressure started to rise, not just from the trespass, but from the sheer audacity. She wasn't just ignoring my property rights, she was actively demonstrating that she owned the space. That's when I picked up my phone. I didn't dial the HOA, that's playing her game. I dialed the non-emergency police line. "Yes, officer," I said, keeping my voice level and calm, "I need to report a severe case of criminal trespass. I have trespassers swimming in a very dangerous, privately stocked body of water on my property, 1234 Willow Creek Lane." The operator, accustomed to HOA squabbles, sounded bored. "Sir, is this a dispute with a neighbor? We generally recommend civil remedies for private property disputes." "No, ma'am," I pressed, keeping my eyes fixed on Karen, who was now adjusting her sunglasses, blissfully unaware of the conversation unfolding just 50 yards away. "This is a serious public safety issue. The water is actively hazardous. I stocked it last night with 3 juvenile bull sharks. They are known to be aggressive, and I will not be held liable when someone gets hurt. I need officers here immediately." A beat of stunned silence greeted me. The operator's voice, when it returned, was no longer bored. It was tight, high-pitched, and frantic. "Sir, did you say, sharks? Are you certain?" The panic was palpable. I hung up the phone. It was time for the show to begin. The sirens started faint, a distant moan, quickly escalating into the urgent wail of approaching emergency vehicles. Karen, still floating serenely on her inflatable swan, finally looked up. She frowned, annoyed by the interruption to her sunbathing. The sound wasn't coming from the main road, it was getting louder, closer, echoing off the dense trees lining the back of my property. I watched her push her sunglasses up onto her head, her face a mask of irritation, that specific brand of self-importance that assumes all noise and inconvenience must be directed away from her immediate vicinity. The patrol car, lights flashing blue and red, pulled up to the gate of my access road, screeching slightly as the officer hit the brakes. 2 officers jumped out. The first one, a large, serious man whose name tag read Officer Davis, immediately grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight and clipboard. The second officer started moving quickly toward the fence line. They had clearly been briefed about the urgency of the call. This wasn't a speeding ticket or a lost dog, this was a reported public danger. Officer Davis spotted me first, sitting quietly on my porch. He hurried over, his brow furrowed with professional concern. "Sir, you called 911? About sharks?" I stood up slowly, pointing calmly toward the middle of the lake where Karen was now paddling her swan a bit further out. "That's correct, officer. Those 3 individuals are trespassing on my private property. I have clearly posted no trespassing signs, but more importantly, I stocked the lake last night with 3 juvenile bull sharks. They are extremely aggressive in freshwater environments. I warned the adult trespasser yesterday, and she chose to ignore me." Davis's eyes went wide, flicking instantly between me and the oblivious trio in the water. He didn't waste time arguing the legality, the immediate threat was paramount. He cupped his hands around his mouth and yelled, his voice cutting through the humid air, "Ma'am, you need to exit the water immediately. There are dangerous animals in the lake." Karen stopped paddling. She looked at the officer, then at me, then back at the officer. Her expression wasn't fear, it was pure, unadulterated contempt. She clearly thought this was some elaborate, coordinated prank between me and the local police to scare her off. She even let out a small, scoffing laugh. "Oh, please," she shouted back, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "What next, officer? Alligators? This man is delusional. You should be arresting him for harassment. My kids are perfectly safe. It was at that exact moment that the water near the end of my dock, about 20 feet from where Daisy was splashing, rippled, not from a splash, but from a deliberate, swift displacement. A dark, sleek shadow, about 4 feet long, cut quickly just beneath the surface, moving in a tight circle. It was one of the newcomers, likely alerted by the commotion. The sight of that shadow, dark, silent, and terrifyingly fast, instantly wiped the smirk off Officer Davis's face. He knew the difference between a large base and the unmistakable shape of something far more sinister. His voice changed from a warning to an imperative bellow, "Ma'am. This is not a joke. Get your children out of the water now." Karen, however, was still rooted in her smug defiance. She hadn't seen the shadow, her view was obstructed by the inflatable swan. She rolled her eyes, convinced the officer was dramatically overreacting. "Oh, for heaven's sake. It's probably just a turtle, officer. Stop harassing me. I'm going to report you to the chief of police for interfering with my recreation." But then, the lake itself seemed to answer. Near the deeper section where Caleb was treading water, a second, larger shadow surfaced just enough to create a distinct, triangular disturbance in the water's surface tension. It didn't splash, it simply moved with predatory purpose. Caleb, perhaps feeling the slight change in the current or seeing the unnatural wake, suddenly looked down. He didn't see the full creature, but he definitely saw a flicker of white under the dark water, the belly of a powerful fish, turning. A small, high-pitched noise escaped Caleb. It wasn't a scream yet, just a gasp of terror as instinct took over. He started paddling frantically, not toward the shore, but toward his mother's large swan raft, his arms churning the water into a sudden froth. This movement, the sudden, desperate splash, was exactly the trigger I had known would happen. Bull sharks are notorious for their aggressive response to sudden noise and disturbance. In less than a second, the water around Caleb erupted. It wasn't a huge Hollywood thrashing, it was a quick, violent snap that created a geyser of water and foam. Whatever had been circling him had just struck. Caleb immediately started screaming, a genuine, heart-stopping shriek that echoed across the quiet neighborhood. Karen froze on her swan raft. Her pink drink tumbled into the water. She looked from Caleb's flailing, terrified form to the churning water, then finally, to the two very serious, very armed police officers standing on the bank, their faces pale with shock. Daisy, who had been playing quietly near the cattails, finally saw the panic in her brother's eyes and started crying uncontrollably. The realization hit Karen not as a theory, but as a violent, sensory-assaulting fact. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a turtle. And as she looked closer at the water, she finally saw the distinct, gray-green dorsal fin slice the surface, maybe 20 feet from her son, before submerging again with terrifying grace. The smug composure of HOA Karen shattered instantly, replaced by a raw, primal terror that curdled her features. The sound of her son's shrieks, mixed with the sight of that telltale fin, broke the illusion of her control. She wasn't an HOA president in that moment, she was just a mother facing an impossible, deadly situation. Officer Davis acted with split-second decisiveness. He didn't wait for permission, he unclipped his radio. "We have a confirmed active aquatic threat. Sending EMS and animal control for specialized retrieval. We need the immediate evacuation of the shoreline." He then turned to me. "Sir, are they aggressive?" "Bull sharks are among the most aggressive species, officer," I stated, my heart pounding despite my initial vindication. "They're juveniles, but they're strong and they react to splashing. They are in pure fresh water, they are highly stressed." Karen scrambled to get off the swan raft, falling into the water near it. The moment she entered the water, the chaos intensified. The bull shark that had startled Caleb circled back, attracted by the new, large source of splash. It didn't strike her, but the fin cut a tight, fast circle just 5 feet away from her leg, creating a powerful, unsettling wake. Karen let out a guttural scream, a sound completely devoid of her usual affected superiority, and desperately swam back onto the slippery plastic swan. Meanwhile, Caleb, paralyzed by fear and the sheer adrenaline of the near miss, was barely keeping his head above water. Daisy, waiting in the shallows, started running blindly, not toward the fence, but along the shoreline, trying to reach her brother. "Daisy, stop! Get out! The bank!" I yelled, knowing the juvenile was likely cruising the perimeter. Officer Davis was already stripping off his heavy vest and boots. He knew he couldn't wait for specialized backup. "I'm going in," he shouted to his partner, "cover us." "Officer, wait," I interjected, stepping forward. "You'll be attracting them more. We need a distraction." I quickly surveyed my surroundings. My fishing shed. I sprinted toward it, remembering the massive bag of specialized fish food I had ordered for the tilapia I used to raise. It was pungent, oily, and designed to induce a feeding frenzy. I grabbed the 50-pound sack and ran back to the water's edge. "Officer, stand by the bank. I'm going to draw them away." I hurled the sack of food with all my strength toward the far side of the lake, directly opposite the 3 trespassers. The bag ripped open mid-air, scattering a wide cloud of dark, oily pellets that hit the water with a concentrated splat. The scent hit the water instantly, and the 2 visible fins, including the one circling Karen, immediately diverted, cutting hard through the water toward the sudden, massive influx of easy food. The massive cloud of chum and oily feed hit the far end of the lake like a dinner bell, and the response was immediate and terrifyingly efficient. The 2 visible fins, one from the center and one near the shallows, executed rapid 180-degree turns and darted toward the scent, demonstrating the raw power and instinct of the predators. The water there began to churn as the newly stocked residents fought for the easy meal, giving the humans a precious, terrifyingly brief, window of opportunity. "Now! Go! Go!" Officer Davis roared, sprinting into the water up to his waist, reaching out to Caleb first. The boy was whimpering, paralyzed, clinging to the swan raft which Karen was now desperately trying to push toward the bank. Daisy, finally responding to the distraction, was running full tilt along the edge of the lake toward the officers. Davis grabbed Caleb by the arm and, with a powerful heave, pulled the boy completely free of the water and onto the safety of the grassy bank. Caleb collapsed, shaking violently, but safe. Karen, however, was having a more difficult time. The swan raft, now partially deflated from her frantic climbing, became a liability. As she tried to paddle with her hands, a third, smaller shark, the one I hadn't yet seen, cruised back toward the disturbance. It wasn't drawn by the food, but by the struggling activity. It hit the side of the raft with a forceful bump, causing Karen to lose her grip and tumble back into the water with a loud splash. The officer covering Davis immediately fired his gun not at the water, but into the air, a deafening shot designed solely to create a shocking auditory deterrent. The sound, amplified by the tree line, was enough to momentarily disorient the juvenile near Karen. That gave me the fraction of a second I needed. I didn't hesitate. I dashed to the far end of my dock, extending the long, aluminum boat hook I use for guiding the fishing boat. "Karen! Grab the hook! Now!" I shouted, the volume of my voice competing with the echo of the gunshot and her panicked cries. She was thrashing, her fear overriding any coherent thought. She finally saw the hook, a lifeline extended by the very man she had tried to control and condemn. She lunged, grasping the cold metal pole with both hands as I pulled with all my strength. Her clothes were heavy with water, making the retrieval agonizingly slow, but the drag was steady. Inch by agonizing inch, I pulled her the last few feet. When her feet finally found the mud of the bank, she collapsed next to Caleb, gasping for breath, her face smeared with mud and tears, staring at the water with wide, traumatized eyes. The silence that followed, save for the sirens of the arriving EMS and animal control vehicles, was deafening. The Queen of Cedar Creek Estates was conquered, not by me, but by the consequences of her own arrogance. The scene on my private shoreline quickly transformed into a controlled frenzy of emergency personnel. The loud arrival of 2 ambulances, an animal control vehicle, and a truck from the Department of Natural Resources, DNR, broke the heavy silence. Caleb and Daisy were being checked over by paramedics, wrapped in thermal blankets despite the heat. Karen sat nearby, still dripping, being attended to by Officer Davis's partner. She was in full shock, unable to do more than nod weakly as the officer took her statement. I, meanwhile, was speaking to the DNR official, a stern woman named Agent Perez, who was meticulously documenting the situation. This was the part of the plan I hadn't fully considered, the legal and ecological fallout of stocking 3 juvenile bull sharks in a private, spring-fed lake. Mr. Hawthorne, Agent Perez stated, her voice sharp and professional, bull sharks are a federally monitored species. They are also incredibly resilient and adaptable to fresh water. While this is your private, deeded property, the introduction of a non-native apex predator, especially one with a known danger profile, is a massive ecological hazard. You can't just drop sharks into a lake, even if it's yours. I understand, Agent, I replied, handing her the meticulous paperwork I had filed with the aquatic farm. I didn't do this lightly. They are juveniles, specifically chosen for a controlled, temporary habitat. They were intended for a research study I was planning on invasive species deterrence. The paperwork is all there. I omitted the part about the aggressive trespasser. She studied the forms, her eyebrows arched in skepticism. Temporary or not, we have a public safety incident here, and it's a miracle no one was seriously injured. DNR will be taking over the immediate retrieval and relocation of these animals. You will be held financially responsible for the entire operation, which I assure you, will be substantial. I nodded, knowing the cost was worth the lesson delivered. I accept that responsibility. As Agent Perez organized the DNR team for the delicate and dangerous task of netting and relocating the juvenile sharks, Officer Davis approached me, clipboard in hand. His face was a mix of exhaustion and professional exasperation. Mr. Hawthorne, you certainly got your point across. However, reckless endangerment, even to deter trespassers, is a serious charge. You put those kids' lives in danger. And while the mother was criminally trespassing, I'm going to have to decide how to proceed here. Before I could respond, Karen, who had seemingly regained some stability, stumbled over, eyes red, but focused on me. She didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She simply looked me dead in the eye, and the fear in her gaze was the most profound vindication I could have received. Ethan, she whispered, her voice cracking, I saw the teeth. They were swimming with sharks. Officer Davis stood between us, sensing the tension, but Karen's raw fear seemed to disarm any immediate hostility. She wasn't preparing a lawsuit, she was processing trauma. Davis, however, had a duty to uphold. Mr. Hawthorne, he repeated, I understand the frustration with trespassers, but you can't retaliate with dangerous wildlife. Officer, with all due respect, I didn't retaliate with wildlife, I countered calmly, pulling the rest of my file from the pouch of my fishing vest. I stocked my private lake with species appropriate for its freshwater ecosystem as defined by my deed, which classifies this body as a privately managed aquatic habitat. The paperwork Agent Perez is reviewing details my long-term intent to use the bull sharks, which are physiologically capable of surviving in pure freshwater, for a self-funded study on invasive carp control. They were not put there as a booby trap, but as a necessary, albeit extreme, part of my private ecological management plan. Davis scrolled through his notepad. but you admitted on the phone that you called 911 because they were a hazard to the people trespassing. I called 911 precisely because I had confirmed the presence of a known hazard which I was managing, and 3 individuals decided to recklessly disregard my no trespassing signs, placing themselves directly into that danger. My call was not a threat, it was a public safety alert and an attempt to prevent the incident we just witnessed. Had I not intervened with the food and the boat hook, the outcome could have been tragic. I am legally responsible for managing my property, which includes mitigating risk to authorized users. Trespassers assume all liability. I then looked at Karen, whose eyes still hadn't left the lake. Karen, your kids were swimming in my lake. My private, fenced, and clearly marked lake. I can stock it with any legal, freshwater tolerant species I choose, provided I comply with DNR regulations, which I am doing. You were warned yesterday, you ignored that warning, and you put your children in harm's way simply to prove a point about property boundaries that do not involve you. She flinched. The weight of that truth, her reckless arrogance versus the immediate danger, finally crushed her righteous indignation. She didn't have a leg to stand on. The HOA rules didn't supersede state laws on private property, and no reasonable court would side with a mother who ignored clear signage to swim in a private body of water, regardless of what was swimming in it. Officer Davis sighed, closing his notepad. The DNR will handle the sharks and the environmental impact. As for criminal charges, he looked from Karen, shivering despite the heat, to me, standing there with my well-documented legal defense. I'm issuing you a warning, Mr. Hawthorne, for the extreme nature of the risk. But Ms. Jennings, you and your children are being formally warned against trespassing. If you ever set foot on Mr. Hawthorne's property again, you will be arrested. The call is closed as a dangerous animal incident, precipitated by criminal trespass. The DNR team, wearing thick neoprene waders, began the highly coordinated process of deploying specialized nets and acoustic lures to safely capture the 3 juvenile bull sharks. The commotion had subsided, but the sense of danger still hung heavy in the air. Karen, holding her 2 trembling children tightly, was being escorted back toward the gap in the fence by a paramedic, her image as the flawless HOA matriarch irrevocably shattered. Her silence spoke volumes. She was utterly defeated, her control complex drowned by the reality of nature's indifference. As she passed, she paused and looked back, not at the lake, but at me. There was no glare, no final threat, only a vacant, haunted expression. I realized that my calculated, vengeful act had inadvertently saved her children, but also inflicted a trauma far deeper than a simple confrontation ever could. The lake, my sanctuary, was now a place of nightmares for her. The message had been received, loud and terrifyingly clear. Later that evening, after the last DNR truck had left, taking the 3 very unhappy bull sharks with them, they were being relocated to a deep water scientific reserve, I was assured. I walked down to the dock. The water was still, reflecting the brilliant orange sunset. It looked calm, peaceful, and utterly empty. The carp and bass I had stalked before were likely still hiding in the depths, but the delicate balance had been utterly destroyed by the chaos. I sat on the edge of the dock, staring at the perfectly smooth surface. The expensive cost of the shark retrieval, the legal wrangling, the stress of the day, it was all weighing on me. But the trespassers were gone. My property rights had been vindicated, not by a flimsy HOA rule book, but by the primal law of the wild. Karen Jennings would never again cast an entitled shadow across my land. The entire neighborhood now understood that my lake was not an amenity, it was a fortress, managed by a man who took his property rights to the extreme. A few days later, a contractor showed up unannounced. He worked diligently for 2 hours, and by lunchtime, a brand new, 10-foot tall, solid cedar fence stood where the old wire gap had been. It was paid for in full, no questions asked. A small, anonymous note was taped to the wood, "We understand. Stay safe." It was clear Karen hadn't just learned a lesson, she had conceded the war entirely. The lake remained quiet. I restocked it slowly, carefully, with native, harmless species. But every now and then, when the wind hit the water just right, creating a tight little ripple near the dock, I swear I could still see the ghost of a fin cutting the surface, a permanent, powerful reminder of the night I defended my lake by unleashing the last wave of defense.